that question is yes to all of them. You see, Leo was adopted. His biological parents left him in a dumpster for dead when he was under a year old. What kind of parents do something like that? A woman heard his cry, walked into the back alley, and took him and raised him. It just so happens that she was already a foster mother and had 11 other boys she was raising. I personally never met her or my adopted uncles. While there, it turns out she was extremely abusive to him. From what he told me, it sounds like something that came right out of a horror movie. Apparently, she would lock him into the basement, shackle him to an old metallic bed frame, and beat him with random objects, bats, pipes, hockey sticks, and leave him there for weeks at a time, barely feeding him while he was there. He also ended up explaining to me that he was also being molested randomly through it all. Although he never really talked about it too much, I can understand the painful side of things, but I do believe that there was a part of him that felt shameful. While which he should not be feeling, it wasn't his fault. But I've come to an understanding when things like this happen to someone, sadly, they inevitably do feel shame. Unless, of course, it's been taken care of through many steps, like forgiveness, coming to the knowledge of your truth, and the worth of your identity in Christ, among other factors. I'll make and touch on identity later. While he was growing up, he got caught up into the wrong crowds. He ended up joining a gang called Popeyes, who at the time were closely affiliated with Hell's Angels. I don't know much in regards to all of this. Certain things I do know are they were some pretty evil, sadistic people in Montreal back in the 60s and 70s that would randomly kill and rape women and children. One day they started shooting up the location where my mom and dad were currently residing, and my dad started shooting back, not aiming to kill them, but to stop them. So he was going for their knees. The RCMP came within minutes of the shootout and ended up thanking my dad, because the police were looking for them for quite a while and didn't charge him as it was self-defense. Something else about Leo is he would get into fights. Not really by his own accord, but his half-brothers were always getting into trouble. There was a bar fight one time, and his brother started a fight, provoking 12 soldiers. And of course, my dad was trying to protect him, despite his stupidity of him starting something he could not finish. His brother ended up running away, leaving my dad to fight and fend off everyone on his own. And he did manage to get them all on the ground, not killing anyone, just getting them down. But he got severely mangled in the process. I personally would not have believed all these stories told to me, but I did witness firsthand my dad putting down 6 men within a minute, if not less. I was about 8 years old. Dad and I went to the convenience store. On the way back, we took the back alley just to get home a little bit quicker. All of a sudden, 6 men came out of nowhere. One had a pipe, another had a chain, still another had a bat, while another had a switchblade. When they came out, my dad grabbed me and threw me into a pile of garbage. Once I removed all the garbage off of myself and looked carefully, all the men were on the ground. Not dead, but he knocked them out. Dad just looked at me with sadness in his eyes, as though he really did not want to fight, because he didn't have a choice and said to me, "It's okay, son, let's go home." It was at that moment I realized everything he had told me about his past, it was true. I ended up asking him if he would teach me how to fight if I ever needed it to defend myself. At the age of 10, 11, he did teach me everything I needed to know in case I ever needed it in the future. While I'm on the subject of covering and explaining my dad's past, I might as well also cover my mother's past before continuing the story. Give me 1 second, please. My sister, nope, sorry. My mother is actually similar to my dad's story in many ways. She too was adopted. Her biological parents ended up selling her to someone for a case of beer. No joke. And she also was abused and molested by her foster parents. To my understanding, they would actually tie her to a table while doing so. Much like my dad, Mom wouldn't talk about it too much. Same idea. Painful memories with shame that follows. So again, all things considered, I believe they overall did a very decent job raising my sister and I. Finally, last thing to make mention before continuing is about 3 to 4 years prior to leaving Calgary, my parents ended up converting from Catholicism to Christianity, which is a good thing, but never really dealt with the past issues, trauma, and patterns. So, the behavioral patterns did in fact remain the same, condemning themselves and us. Now, because my parents decided to become Christians, despite that Mel and I were born and baptized Catholic, we were told to become Christians and to get rebaptized. But it was not really by our choice. It was demanded of us to do so. So we did. As for myself, as far back as I can remember, I have always believed in God. And I have always believed in Jesus and the Holy Spirit. I knew of him, but I did not know him personally. After my dad ended up kicking both Mel and Tom out, they found a place within a couple days. They moved about a half block away from us. At this point, my parents ended up moving again, but this time it was different. This time we ended up leaving without telling Melanie anything. My dad explained to me, and he said, Mel made her choice to be with Thomas. She has become rebellious towards us, the family, and she is to be cut off permanently. Also stating, you will never see your sister again. We ended up moving on the other side of town. Not only have I lost my sister again, but in order to move into this apartment, my parents ended up having to sell Buddy due to there being no pets allowed. I ended up losing both my sister and my dog within a matter of a week. Once moved to the new location, I ended up falling into a depression. A very deep depression. I just couldn't handle it anymore. What ended up happening to me was I just stayed in bed. And I did not get out of bed for anything. To this day, I still don't remember even getting up to go to the washroom. What I do remember clearly is I was in bed and I would pick the tip of my fingers around where my fingernails are with my other nails. I remember peeling so much skin off around my fingernails, all of them, that I was bleeding quite a bit. So I was just like fidgeting a lot. And I also can remember that I barely ate anything at all. And honestly, I really don't remember eating one thing, you guys, not one thing. Uh, I know my parents brought me food, but I just didn't want to eat and completely lost my appetite. I used to be a decent, normal sized kid with a healthy body weight. If anything, I would say I was about 5 pounds overweight until this happened. I lost about 20 or 30 pounds in those 5 months. My metabolism has never been the same since. My dad would randomly come in my room and read me letters he had written to me, pretty much stating and asking me to please not kill myself or to give up, with the attempt to reassure me that things are going to get better over time. Being in my room for long periods of time was nothing really new to me anymore. Remember how I explained that if I got a little too excited, I would get punished? Or how I mentioned that my dad would get locked into a basement for weeks at a time? What my dad did to me was similar. If I ended up doing anything my parents deemed or did not approve of, one example being lying to attempt to avoid getting my dad upset with me, he would tell my mom to take absolutely everything out of my room, including my mattress, my pillow, my blankets, so the room is completely empty and bare. And he would put a bucket in my room and told me, if you need to go to the bathroom, go in the bucket and do not come out of your room. Your mother will bring you your food. And I would be in my room for days, sometimes weeks at a time. While in my room, Dad would randomly come in often and he would read me Proverbs chapter 6, telling me that God hates me and that I am detestable to God. He was saying this because I lied. But I don't think he realized that I was lying to try to not get into trouble, knowing he had a temper, and was trying to avoid the consequences of him getting angry with me. Proverbs 6 explains there are 6 things that God hates and that there are 7 that are detestable to God. One of them being a lying tongue. There were other times where he would sit me in front of the TV and tell me to watch a series called Left Behind, telling me that God and Jesus will leave me behind if I do not change the error of my ways. In other words, my dad was behaving very religiously, being attacked and or oppressed with a spirit of error, what people now call a religious spirit. See 1 John 4, verse 1 to 6. He was also taking specific medications, a steroid called prednisone, for both pain in his lungs and in his shoulder. He was doing weights and it ended up causing many internal issues with his shoulders and overall arm. He had to get surgery, all kinds of stuff. This pill was meant specifically for pain, but it was causing him to get angry and angrier to the point it's just not good. He would also take more than prescribed to try to numb the pain. Around the 5th month of me being in bed, my mom decided to call my sister. She passed the phone to me. Melanie said, "Mom is telling me you're not doing well and you're not eating." I replied, "This is true." She responded, "If you get up and go get something to eat, I will take you out tomorrow and we can hang out for the day." I said, "Okay, thank you. See you tomorrow." And I very slowly got out of bed and carefully walked to the kitchen, feeling super dizzy. I remember eating hash browns and sausage with some bread. Then went back into my room and went to sleep, and did in fact see Melanie the next day and started to explain to her I am having trouble with all this moving and drama, and that I am trying to be strong, that I am trying to keep going, but I'm just really tired. She told me, I understand, and I will try to be there for you more till you can get your a life of your own, and I will also be there beyond that. The next couple months are a bit of a blur. I don't remember, or I do remember slowly coming out of a depression, and my parents and I ended up moving again, this time near the Red Deer Hospital, closer to my sister. Around that time, my mom ended up having seizures. She was first hospitalized in Michener Hospital outside of Red Deer, then got transferred to Red Deer Hospital. She demanded, wow, sorry, you guys, I'm almost done here. I'm almost done the chapter. Let me see. Red Deer Hospital. She met a man there. His name is David. When returning back home, she asked my dad if he could stay with us till he gets back on his feet. Dad allowed it. On Christmas Eve that year, my mom was speaking to David in my room with the lights turned off, with the bedroom door over 3/4 of the way closed. While I was in the living room with my dad, Dad got up to go to the washroom, saw this, and immediately grabbed David, pulled him out of the room, dragged him to the front door, and opened the door and yelled at him saying, "Don't you dare come back here again." Pushed him out, closed the door behind him. I can somewhat understand what my dad was probably thinking at the time. I mean, that definitely doesn't look too good. And it gives quite a bit of room for the mind to go places. But instead of asking questions like what is going on, there was an immediate reaction. Turns out my mom had a very bad migraine, and David really needed to talk to her about certain things, including finding his own place. Once David had been thrown out, my dad started yelling at my mom. He said, "What the hell were you two doing in there?" And I could tell right away he's getting angrier. I interrupted the argument before it turned into a fight. I was afraid my dad might hurt mom. I calmly, very gently grabbed my dad's shoulder in a very gentle way, asking him, "Please calm down." He turned around, he pushed me into a wall, he pinned me to the wall, he used his arm to start choking my throat and my neck, and then he said to me, "Do you really think you can stop me?" And I said, "Of course I don't. And I would not try to either. I just really want you to please calm down because I don't want you to hurt mom." He responded, "I'm not going to hurt her. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on." And then he let me go. The next morning, Christmas morning, mom was nowhere to be found. She had left in the middle of the night, leaving me a note at the coffee pot. The note said, "Joshua, I love you. I am sorry I had to leave." I threw the note out before Dad woke up. That is twice now where I did not get a chance to say goodbye to my sister and now my mom. When Dad woke up, he asked me, "Where's your mother?" I said, "I don't know. I can't find her anywhere," which is true. Then my dad went and sat on the couch and he started crying. Shortly afterwards, we moved again. We moved into the same apartment complex as my sister. We were on the floor above her apartment. A few months after moving there, my dad ended up overdosing. He was cooking with paint thinner and falling asleep standing up at the kitchen sink while his hands were in the water. I went downstairs and I explained to Mel and Tom what was going on. Tom came up with me to check on Dad. Thomas ended up calling an ambulance. They took my dad to the hospital, flushed him out, and kept him overnight before sending him home. After he was admitted, flushed, and had a bed, we spoke to the doctor. Tom, Mel, and myself went back to their place. About 3 hours later, there was a knock at the door with muffle sounds. Then banging on the door. My dad started yelling, "Give me my son back." At that point, both Mel and I have already explained to Tom what Dad is like and what he is capable of if angered. Both Thomas and Melanie were completely terrified. Not knowing what they should do, they ended up calling the police. I really kind of wish they would not have done that. A few minutes later, the police showed up, brought my dad to his apartment, and started questioning him. While the other officer was at Tom and Mel's place asking them questions, I was sitting on the couch at Mel and Tom's while this was all taking place. After the police spoke to both Mel and Tom, he came up to me and he said, "Do you want to go back with your dad?" And I said, "Yes, I do." There were multiple reasons why I said this, mainly because I was worried about him, and since Mom had left, I wasn't sure if Dad would try to commit suicide if I wasn't around anymore. Despite what I have explained so far, Dad and I were very close for the most part. But in the 3 hours prior to Dad coming back from the hospital banging on the door, Tom was explaining to me about going back to school and that the government will pay me to do so. He also brought up that he truly does not believe that ADD exists. And it is a way for a psychiatrist to make money by giving pills to their patients, going as far as to actually proving through conversation that I, in fact, do not have ADD by simply asking me one question. How can you sit for hours at a time and beat any video game you play if you had ADD? You would not be able to focus that long if you had, quote, attention disorder, unquote. Which did make sense, and they both offered that I stay with them, go back to school, upgrade, go to college, and start living a life that is good for me. Also, both strongly recommending that I stop taking these pills right away as they are causing more harm than good. The officer that was speaking to my dad came downstairs telling the other officer speaking to me that I should probably stay with my sister, that my dad is really not in a good condition to take care of me right now. Both Mel and Tom got a restraining order against my dad. And because I was 15 at the time, I really did not have a say in the matter. Okay. On that day, I stopped taking Ritalin. About 2 weeks later, I started thinking extremely clearly again, and I felt amazing. I was in full control of my body again, my thoughts, my body. It was amazing, you guys. And I went and I applied for a government grant so I could go back to school, college, and possibly even get a job in my own place. I will get more into that in the second chapter. On a personal note, I'm looking very forward to getting into the last 7 years of my life and what God has done for me thus far, but feel very strongly to continue explaining the rest of my story first before proceeding. So I ask you to please be patient with me as I am going back and forth here and there, but I can assure you it will all make sense in the end. And I'm really sorry I'm not doing too good a job reading you guys. I didn't sleep too much. About 2 months after moving in with Tom and Mel, we ended up having to go to court to finalize the restraining order. To my surprise, my mother was there. I have not seen or spoken to her in months, and I wanted to say hello, but I was told I am not permitted to speak to either my mother or my dad, and that I am to stay close to Melanie. The judge ended up ruling that the restraining order is to be in effect for 3 years, where Dad is not permitted to have any contact with Melanie, Thomas, or myself for any reason, in any way, not even phone calls. And the judge also explained to Mel and Tom and I that if we attempt to contact Leo in any way, we will be in violation and breaching the restraining order, which in turn will cause us to have 1 year in prison if we attempt to have any kind of contact. And to conclude the no contact order, Mel, Tom, and myself were told to also have zero contact with Mom, that she could be and or participate as a third party where we can speak to her and she can relay back to Leo. As we were leaving, my dad started walking towards us from behind. He started calling out to me, "Joshua, Joshua." 2 guards grabbed him. It did not slow him down one bit. He kept walking towards us, calling out, "Joshua, Joshua." Then 4 guards grabbed him. Nope. Didn't slow him down. He kept coming, calling out, "Joshua." Then 6 guards grabbed him. At this point, we were outside of the building on the sidewalk. Dad was at the top of the staircase, right outside at the front doors of the courthouse, calling, "Joshua." I turned around, looking back at him. I was crying. He was crying as well. Dad chose, which I know he chose, to get on his knees. He first spoke to the guards saying, "I'm on the ground. I am not fighting you. I just want to say something to my son before he leaves." He ended up speaking to me briefly, saying, "I know this is not your doing, son. I am so sorry, and I love you dearly. I will see you again the second this is all over and done with. While we're apart, be strong for me and take care of yourself. In the meantime, I will get myself better so I can be a better dad and husband, and I will stop taking the pills I'm taking." I so desperately wanted to say something back, to go run up to him, to hug him, something, anything. But again, I was told if I say anything to him, I would get into trouble. So I said nothing, but I nodded my head yes, crying profusely. And then we left. This was now the 3rd time where I was unable to say goodbye. First my sister, then my mom, and now my dad. But what could I do? I did the only thing I knew how to do at the time. I would see my life as though I am shoveling the snow at a motel, and I would continue moving forward with a few thoughts in mind. Keep going. You're almost there. Look how far you've come. Look how much you've done so far. You cannot give up now. Keep going.